I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us for the second in our series of podcasts supporting the new documentary, A Climate Conversation, which debuted on Newsmax at the end of October. I believe it was October 29th, and which has been gaining a significant amount of mind share in the marketplace. And we're using this podcast format in order to extend and support and encourage more dialogue among reasonable people about this subject, which has drawn so much energy out of the cultural and social, political, and economic conversation, not just in the United States, but around the world. So we're lucky today to have two of the stars of a climate conversation with us and to engage in more conversation and not just platitudinous conversation, but fact-based and science-based conversation. So it's great to have a couple scientists with us to do that. So we're happy to have Walter Johnson, of course, with us. Walt is the progenitor, the maker, the producer, the funder, the writer, ultimately the star of A Climate Conversation. Walt's a geophysicist with a long career in earth sciences, and we think has a unique perspective born of a life spent in nature and in working to derive energy from this planet. And we're very fortunate to have the executive director of the CO2 Coalition, author and geologist Gregory Wrightstone, the author of 2017's Amazon bestseller, which, if I'm not mistaken, may still be a bestseller in some categories, remarkable achievement, called Inconvenient Facts, and his follow-up, which is out now, I believe, A Very Convenient Warming, and which we want to encourage everyone to get, easy to find, and you can find supporting material all over the internet about a convenient warming. So welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you. Great to spend a little time with you.
Thank you.
Walt, how's everything in Colorado?
It's fairly warm. Here's nice, pleasant time.
Sounds like a conveniently warm day.
It's conveniently warm. It's not too cold. It gets down to 0 at night, so or 30 degrees, let's say 32 degrees.
It's great. I'm in Northern California. My name is Dave O'Rourke. My job is to be a spokesperson. My life is businessman and serial entrepreneur in the financial technology space, and normal American guy who's got children and grandchildren and has some skin in the game because of that. And I'm terribly interested in all this. I'm asking lay persons questions today of people who are anything but lay people. So, Greg, let's ask you. You've written a new book. It's a follow-up to one of the most successful books on this topic that has been written to date. A wonderful counterpoint to the book that Al Gore wrote a number of years ago, virtually all of which did not fare well under the lens of history. What stimulated you to write this book, and tell us about your journey in creating this book?
Let's take a step back first and talk about why I wrote my first book, which is Inconvenient Facts, and that was my personal search for the truth. I'd heard things about climate change that I knew were just false. As a geologist, I knew that the oceans were not acidifying. They just weren't, but everyone was saying they were. And I suspected other things were wrong. And so I looked back at the very base data. I wanted to learn for myself what the truth was. And what I found, frankly, angered me. I found lots of disinformation, misinformation, just blatant lies passing for pushing this climate alarmism. And so my first book, Inconvenient Facts, exposed the truth about what we're actually seeing about temperature, CO2, extreme weather. And the last we talked, I believe it was in November in Colorado, or might have been October, whatever, several months ago. And you and I talked about this. And I've evolved over the last few years from just saying there is no climate crisis And it's true, there is no climate crisis for sure. But I've gone beyond that now. It's not only is there not a climate crisis, what we're seeing from climate change, from warming, more CO2, we're seeing huge benefits to Earth's ecosystems, and humanity's benefiting from that. So this is the next phase from there is no climate crisis to man, it's life is good and getting better. And this is something that we should celebrate. We should celebrate modest warming and more CO2. And we can get, as we go along here, we can talk more about human history and temperature. But so this is a positive message, lifting people up, telling people, and with supporting facts, that by almost every metric, our ecosystems are thriving and improving, and extreme weather's actually decreasing.
One of the facts that I saw, it comes up in both publications, is the reality of the Earth greening, the Earth becoming a greener place, and actually the you can look across all of the scary story stuff that we hear about oceans rising and desertification and forest fires and disastrous events, landfalling hurricanes. It goes on and on and on. And it turns out when we look at data, some of that's not so true.
Yeah. If you don't mind, let's talk first just about sea level rise. And it's looking back, I regret terribly not having another chapter in the book on sea level rise, because it's fascinating. Maybe that'll be in my third book, but let's just say, of course, sea level, the UN says they've identified 18 or 25 island nations that are at great risk for being underwater within just a few years or a couple of decades. The most at-risk island are the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. The highest point on the Maldives is, I believe, 14 feet above sea level. And just on the face of it, well, a little bit of sea level rise will put them underwater. Well, listen to this. 15,000 years ago, the Maldives were also just above sea level. And in the last 15,000 years, sea level has risen 400 feet. Why are those islands not under 400 feet of water? And the answer is a geologic process known as accretion. These islands, as sea level rises, these islands grow. It washes the nearshore sediments, the sands, the gravels, up during storm events onto the island. And it's a slow process, but geology is a slow process, and these islands grow. So what they're telling you is the last 400 feet of sea level rise didn't put those islands under, but now get it, by 2050, according to our current sea level rise, sea level will have risen 2 inches by 2050, barely to your ankles. But the last 400 feet of sea level rise didn't put the Maldives underwater, but that next 2 inches, look out, they're going to be underwater for sure. And it's things like that. People go and go, what? I didn't know that. Nobody knows that. Perhaps Walt does. Maybe he's heard me on another podcast, but nobody's talking about how these islands grow along with sea level rise. But they're all standing there with their hands out looking for more money, climate reparations, because we're going to be underwater in a few decades. No, you're not. No, you're not.
Time magazine had a picture of the Secretary General off of one of those islands with his suit wet, saying the water's rising.
Yeah, that was Tuvalu.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can understand. So I can understand. So as I say, I'm a businessman. I'm not a geologist, not an earth scientist. I have a Bachelor of Science degree, but that was a long time ago. I can understand why a small island nation with not much in the way of natural resources and not much in the way of, globalization, not a big player, right? No mining to speak of, no trade really, other than tourism. I can understand why they would grift a little bit of money from Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is an easy touch. I get that. Help me understand why the leaders of the oil nations of OPEC would host the COP28 session that just happened and cry on screen and talk about the great achievement of COP28. And I've seen actually you talk about the various number of these conferences that have been held over the last 30 or 40 years. What's going on there?
Well, the short answer is I think they want to greenwash their name and get right with the right people, and continue drilling, producing oil that will be going on 100 years from now. It might just be to protect their rear ends, which I think they did quite well. I understand this COP was more of a trade show than it was an environmental show there. And so I'm going to try and hopefully get the CO2 Coalition to get an exhibit space next one. That should be interesting. We got thrown out of the National Science Teaching Association annual convention in May, so we're used to getting thrown out of big events.
So it's my understanding that the hors d'oeuvres and the champagne were extraordinary at COP28 this year. Now, Walt, you have you told me the other day you heard that Tokyo Gas had bought a U.S. company. So suddenly things start to get real when 20% or something of the U.S. uranium mining capacity was sold to the Russians when Secretary Clinton was in office. So meanwhile, we appear to be hamstringing ourselves and actually literally selling assets off to people who aren't quite so whatever it is we are.
It isn't we're willing to. It's just we unwittingly do this. We've been saying for decades, oil and gas is going to go away. Don't invest in oil and gas is what we're telling people. So no one invests in oil and gas. And suddenly the stock price of some of these companies is very low compared with what their real value is. And so if someone from outside comes in and buys them, they see an opportunity because they can buy the gas. They just take the gas, they buy it, they can take it back to Tokyo and sell it. Although here we get in trouble if we sell it, maybe, or we get social stigmas put on us or something. But yes, I see that as a trend. We're selling, and we're the only country in the world, basically, that has private ownership of gas and oil and water and uranium. I've checked that out. We're the only one because I worked for consultant for one of the Emirates over there, and he was looking in the United States. And why are you coming over here to look? He says, well, we're testing new ideas, and we wanted to test them in an area where you had private ownership of minerals. So,
and can I say, Dave, that what Walt just said is very important in that when it comes to energy production, nearly all of the shale production, which is leading to this huge boom in oil and gas production, virtually all of that is on privately held properties. Very, very, very small amount are federally U.S. owned properties, but they own all of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's why oil production continues to expand, because the U.S. government can't put their thumb on the scale of private property development. They can do that by shutting down drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, which Joe Biden and his administration is definitely doing.
So I saw among the ocean pontification that came out of the COP28 event was this mantra of zero fossil fuels. So that's a very different thing than net zero, as I understand it, but zero fossil fuels. So it makes me wonder, what device will we use to lift the lithium ore out of the ground and bring it to the surface, or transport it to the port of call where it can be made into something useful? Is there ever a time when we can actually have any human flourishing without fossil fuels?
The only thing that renewables, solar and energy, produce is the electricity, and that's only intermittently. All the other products, I've seen 6,000 or 8,000 different products are made from oil and gas, from ethanol and plastics, just fabrics. Your North Face parkas are made from derivatives of oil and gas, but you can't get that without oil and rich wet gas to get these products.
So we're playing with large numbers here, Walt. In the film, we have Ken Gregory from Friends of Science up in Calgary, I believe, did an analysis, not necessarily of benefit, but of cost. Like, what is it going to take to go to net zero, either A, through just elimination of fossil fuels as an energy resource, or B, the using carbon sequestration and other effects to essentially back up wind and solar. And both numbers came out to be enormous and trillions of dollars. So what does this not take on, like, sort of, does it not become one of the most important economic decisions of our lives, is what I'm asking.
If we go that way, yes, and we're not having any discussion about it. That's a real problem. We aren't discussing the cost and the benefits of doing that. And that's probably, we could put all kinds of reasons for that, but I'm not a mind reader. But it could be nefarious reasons.
So Greg, let me ask you kind of a sideways or an inverted question about this. What could the benefit be if some warming and a more CO2 rich environment, which, by the way, we know that greenhouses, food producers, marijuana growers pump CO2 into their greenhouses. They pump a lot of it into their, we know if you talk to plants, breathing on the plant gives them more CO2. We know CO2 is good for plant growth. So what is the benefit of trying to eliminate or reduce CO2? In fact, could it not be a detriment to reduce CO2?
Well, it's a huge benefit if you own a carbon capture company or you're selling wind turbines or the parts that go into wind turbines. There's a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars to be reaped out of this with all the federal benefits. So yeah, it's hugely beneficial if you're sucking money out of the economy. It's hugely harmful economically if you're a citizen paying taxes that's putting that money, it's money coming out of my left pocket and going in the right pocket of the guy that owns or gal that may own one of these companies benefiting from it. It's just a horrible thing. We see you look around at the turbines, they talk about them as though it's a thing of beauty. I see them as a blight on our landscape. I listened to a hearing in Pennsylvania of the Game Commission. They had 14 game commissioners voted unanimously to ban any wind turbine projects on the 1.4 million acres that the Pennsylvania Game Commission controls. And those commissioners were just vitriolic in their hatred for wind turbines. And we're seeing rising opposition across the country against wind turbines, against a solar panel, and do not call them farms. That's too benign. These are industrial scale facilities. People are banning, rising up in Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas, to fight against CO2 pipelines. They're sucking what we call the miracle molecule, a beneficial molecule of CO2, carbon dioxide, out of the atmosphere at great cost, and then transporting it halfway across the continent to pump down wells so they can produce more oil. No, there's so many things wrong, but I got to tell you, Dave and Walt, I'm hugely optimistic. I think we're winning. I really do. I see it almost every day. I see more evidence of people waking up and rebelling against this push for net zero. For Wyoming, the governor's now saying he wants to go to negative net zero, whatever. And he's going to do it by sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And we're fighting them. I'll be traveling to Wyoming here in a few weeks to speak with people there. We're fighting it in Wyoming. We're fighting it in Montana. We'll be going to Arizona, Arizona Free Republic Club. here in January to talk with them about how they can fight in Arizona. So we're working with the states. We did it here in Virginia to push back against the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and the Virginia Clean Economy Act with Governor Youngkin. So we have the scientists and the science that we want to offer to all the states in the nation and also around the world, to push back against this nonsense. People hear this information we talk about is not readily available to most people. When they hear it and they look at it and they say, and when they hear me say carbon dioxide is actually, we're in a carbon dioxide famine. We don't have too much carbon dioxide. We don't have enough. They hear that and they see the graphs that go back millions of years. They don't know it. But people are thirsty for this information.
Well, if I may, and you may not hate me for this, Greg, but at the end of your 2017 book, Inconvenient Facts, you publish a brilliant little piece of work, which I call the Guide to Thanksgiving Conversation with your non-binary nephew at the Ivy League college or whoever. And so I think
Billy. We'll call him Billy for it. All right, go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about your guide and how people can help you fight this fight? We need more lobbyists, right? We need more grassroots people who are informed.
Yeah, we do. And I tell you what, I'm so enthused about what we see people fly. Our CO2 coalition, when I took over as executive director at the end of 2020, we had 2 employees. We've launched we had 133 donors. This was late 2020, 133 donors. Today, we've got over 8,600 from 133. And we've got 99.9% of our donors are small individual donors. And so it's allowed us, these $20 and $30 donations have allowed us to expand. I needed to expand the staff here from 2 employees because I had a vision for what we wanted to do. And now we're able to hire more people. We're up to 10 employees now. And I'm going to hire another in 2 weeks. He's signing on. It's really uplifting to see people rallying to our cause. And they like our educational materials, the scientific publications. And we've advanced climate conversation. We've pushed that out. People love the documentary, Walt. Thank you. It's really, I've heard so many good things about the documentary. It's helping to change the conversation, and we need more of these. And let's keep going and look forward to the next one, actually.
Walt, is there going to be another documentary in your future?
It depends on how long I live, I guess. It's not out of the question. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think we'd all be interested in that next thing. And so this brings a little thing I also want to, Greg, I think the work you're doing is, I don't want to go crazy or, offend anybody, but I would call it God's work. I mean, I think this is really important stuff, right?
That's funny.
I want to show the Christmas card that I received. See if I can get this right. This Christmas card came to me from you. And if you can look closely, you can see thematic images, including polar bear, that come from the children's books that the CO2 Coalition. So this is one of the other big fights, right? We have big fights over climate change. We have big fights over the American education system and what the kids are learning. You guys are doing some important work here.
We're actually doing something about it. We have an education committee, 18 people, most of them PhDs. And who knew that these people, you would think PhDs in chemistry and physics, they'd be a bunch of eggheads that couldn't do anything. But they love it when I say that. They've actually created the CO2 Learning Center, co2learningcenter.com. We've got a series of educational comic books that are done manga style by our Brazilian artist. He's a full-time employee working out of Brazil. And this book is called Simon the Solar Powered Cat. And it's about photosynthesis, but it's done manga style The kids just love it. That's our favorite book. We have two more coming out. We've got a series of videos that are really good. All of this done by Tiago Heilinger in Brazil. And it's interesting. We've got a Brazilian lady on our staff. She's a PhD in chemical engineering, and she's from Brazil, so she interprets. I don't know any Portuguese, and our artist doesn't know much English, so we go back and forth. What they've accomplished is amazing. And the important thing here, Dave, we also, for each one of these products, we have a lesson plan that have been developed by Dr. Sharon Camp. She's got a PhD in chemistry as well. She's a geologist, BS, but she's a AP science teacher, just retired. She's created these lesson plans that are just wonderful and marvelous. So we're working to get these in front of primarily homeschoolers. They've been flocking to our site. We offer free information, free books, free videos. Also charter schools. We've been successful there. Public schools is a different situation. Like I said, we got kicked out of the National Science Teaching Association meeting back in May for daring to put up information in science that went against their climate crisis narrative. So I'm very proud of this education effort. Again, it's co2learningcenter.com.
That's just wonderful. So, I mean, I'm tempted, you can't, it's hard to live in America and not develop a little bit of a cynical outlook about our politics and our culture. But you sort of just, Walt, for the sake of this film and its distribution, you kind of can't wait for you to get canceled.
I haven't had it happen
Best thing
yet.
that could ever happen.
But well, I think in our whole film, we aren't confrontational about anything. It's a conversation. And at the time we did the film, Greg was saying, I think we see a turnaround. I think our things are going the other way. And I can see that now too. So I think he's right.
Well, the three of us have eyeball knowledge, firsthand experience, sitting in a room with several hundred people there to watch the debut of the film in Denver back in September. And we know some of those people came loaded for bear. They were for polar bear, whatever. They were there to pick a fight. And when the film was over, they may not have stood up for the standing ovation. 90% of the people gave the film, but they didn't demur. There was no pushback. There was no argument. There were no fights. It was quiet. It was a contemplative moment in which people were challenged in these religious views they have, these useful idiot pedagogies that they suffer from. And this is why this podcast and this film and my relationship with you guys is so important to me personally, because we're talking about $1 million per taxpayer in the United States to go to net zero to produce what outcome? And this is one of the things I wanted to talk about.
Let me back up and correct you there. You said $1 million, that's $1.1 million per adult, but only half of the adults in the US pay taxes.
That's right.
So that's 2.2 million.
So let's talk about this a second. So to get what? So I believe we know something about this. And Greg, maybe you want to help here. If we got the United States and Canada and Australia all got to net zero, we got there. We somehow, bam, the aliens come down to give us a new energy source. We're net zero. How would that change global temperatures going forward, or what would it actually produce?
Well, we would, if you look, and I don't have the number right in front of me, but it's something like 0.04 degrees of Celsius of warming by 2050. We can look, that's actually, we've got that. I've got on my smartphone app. It's called the Magic Simulator, the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas induced climate change. And it's just an incredibly small number. And let's look though, what they're warning us is we can't get 1.5 degrees of warming above what it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, we've already warmed 1.2 degrees. All right. So what they're warning us against is a 0.3 centigrade rise in temperature, which equates to 0.5 degree Fahrenheit that we're all used to using. 0.5 degree Fahrenheit. Dave, if you're sitting in your studio and it warmed up or cooled down half a degree, you would never know it. Your thermostat wouldn't kick on or off. And if you're that worried about it, you could move 19 miles further north and your average temperature would decrease by half a degree. And that's what they're all warning about, that if we have another half of a degree Fahrenheit in warming, the oceans are going to boil, polar bears are going to die, famine will set in. It just does not meet the smell test at all. A half a degree Fahrenheit. It rises more than that between 11 a.m. and noon on any given day. And it's, and put in that perspective, you just have to wonder who would actually buy into something like that. I'll tell you who: Greta Thunberg, a high school dropout, John Kerry, and all these other people that are pushing this agenda, and those that are pushing that are making money out of pushing this green agenda.
Well, they're having some effect. They appear to own the entire mainstream media.
Yep.
They appear to own the entire blue state infrastructure, every urban organization, every victim, or there's a 100% correlation between victim organizations and climate net zero advocacy. 100%, as far as I can see. I never heard of a single sort of victim-based organization that isn't on the bus here. It's sort of I don't know what to make of it. Is there no politician? Is there no newspaper? Is there nobody who sees this thing for what appears to be the expensive boondoggle that it is? I have a hard time with this. I don't understand the motivation for the New York Times. What are they getting?
And that's why we need to be silenced. That's why somebody like Walt Johnson or Gregory Wrightstone, they need to silence us. If we actually got on the mainstream media, it'd be all over, because what we say makes sense. It not only makes sense, but it's backed up by science, facts, and data. They won't debate us because they won't know that when that has occurred, they've gotten their rear ends kicked.
I think Greg was going to debate the governor of Wyoming. Was that you that was going to debate him?
Yes,
I talked the other week to a legislator from Wyoming. It was quite a big deal, and he backed off of that.
Yeah, we were that. I can't talk and reveal what our plans are for the future, but that's not over yet. That's not over yet. We're actually writing. We're in the process, and that's what I'll be doing shortly, is completing a paper on Wyoming and climate change. Like I say, it's a lot of fun. With the one in Montana will be fun because the Climate Kids lawsuit, where the judge ruled in favor of these 18 kids ranging from the age of 4 to 16, and the judge, her findings of fact were just ludicrous, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel. So we'll have that published here in probably 30 days on Montana and climate change.
Well, it sounds like it'll soon be a formerly untold story. And this is a theme of yours, this greatest untold story. And I heard you make some remarks not long ago about what's happening in the Southern Sahara. And it fascinates me. And I'm positive that not one in 1,000 people who view this podcast will know what I'm talking about right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in the Sahara?
Yeah, and just don't trust anybody. Don't trust me. Don't trust the experts. But I will say, just Google 2 words: Sahara and greening, and you'll go right to a NASA article by NASA talking about how 200,000 square kilometers of the Southern Sahara, it's an area known as the Sahel, that was a barren desert in the late 20th century. Over the last 40, 50 decades, has turned into a lush grassland and farmland. People are living there that haven't lived there in 1,000 years. And that's the story that doesn't get out. The story is that deserts aren't expanding; they're shrinking, just as the Sahara. And that's backed up by the other warm periods. In North Africa, for example, during the Roman warm period, which was much warmer than today, life was, and there were, again, agriculture flourished in North Africa. It was the breadbasket of Rome. The Roman army marched on the grain produced in Tunisia and Egypt. And that's why it was so valuable to the Roman Empire. And again, it was much warmer at that time. And then, as happens, it started getting cold, and the Roman Empire was huge. That and other civilizations around the world collapsed when it started getting colder. And that's the repeated story we see. And I spend quite a bit of time in my new book talking about climate change in human history. I find it fascinating. It's and also the relationship between, we see the volcanoes. There's just been a recent eruption in Iceland. There have been, over the last 3,000 years, there have been 3 huge eruptions on Iceland that were horrific. It caused, each one caused 4 or 5 years of cooling, blocked the sun, led to crop failures and famine. And it was coincided by the other cooling periods. And in fact, Iceland, in the late 17th century, there was talk of abandoning the entire island because it had lost 50% of its population to the combination of cold weather, famine, and the eruption of the volcano Hekla.
Well, this is thematic. They're blaming school shootings on global warming. The fires, terrible devastation in Lahaina several months ago, blamed on global warming. But my understanding is that it was not anything to do with global warming. I think you know something about that.
Yeah, Lahaina was actually burned to the ground in the 1800s. I don't have the date captured right here. The fire swept through. Then that western part of the island is prone to fire at that time every year. The great winds come up, similar to the Diablo winds of California, the Santa Ana winds. As the wind comes across the top of the mountain, it then rushes down towards the sea, and as it's decreasing in elevation, it starts speeding up and heating up, and so you get these hot, dry winds that come down, and just any spark, and there were a lot of sparks at Lahaina because of the high winds knocked over the power lines and sparked and created the wildfires. And Lahaina was used to be protected for the most part because there were pineapple farmland all around Lahaina. And the pineapple manufacturer growing and the canning facilities went away many decades ago. And now those pineapple fields have now grown up with invasive grasses that dry out every year and are prone. And these grasses, again, just need a spark. And that's what we get. And we see that also around the world, up in Canada. And we talked about the Canadian fires and the smoke this spring. Well, Canada fires happen every single year. There happened to be a few more, and the wind was blowing in the right direction across the United States. But those fires occur every year, and they're actually, according to the Canadian Fire Service, the CFS, and their data, the number of fires in Canada have been in decline, just as they have in the United States. We're at 20% of wildfire in the United States compared to 90 years ago, but you don't hear that.
What you do here, and this is something I know, Walt, we talked about this a couple of times just recently, and I know we have a couple of charts, if it might back up our conversation, is this: even people who don't know much at all, they don't know nothing, believe in a couple of things. And one of the things they believe is that this temperature rise is causing CO2 to rise. They see an absolute correlation between these two things, but the data appear not to show that. We've got some of this data. Maybe we can put it up on the screen here.
Can I jump in there quick? I think you've got it reversed.
While you're here?
We're being told that CO2 is driving temperature, and not the other way.
Oh, yes, excuse me. I totally backwards.
Yeah, that's all right. That's what I'm here for.
Well, I'm here to make you look good. Okay.
Chris, and Greg is the only one that has gone into the weather data and has been able to zoom in and grab these different things and do different things with it. I think he's kind of modest in accepting his credit, but he's the only one that does it. And look at this is his picture for Christmas Day average temperature in the United States for the last 30 years. And I argue that the temperature has gone down 2 degrees, but they in their publication said it's flat, but it's essentially flat.
Yeah,
Well,
this
how
is
do we
maximum
explain
date.
the blue line there then?
Is the CO2 level, and you see that on the right hand side. The axis there on the left hand side is the temperature at Christmas time, and that's
Yeah, this would be the high maximum daytime temperature for Christmas Day. And you can see it fluctuates. Some years Christmas Day is really warm, and some years Christmas Day is really cold. But there's been no discernible trend one way or the other.
And there's also, I would say, a non-known fact. It's less than little known. It's an unknown fact, which is that the distribution of warmer temperatures is related to where they sit relative to the poles. If I'm not mistaken, these effects, the warming effects, are exaggerated at the poles and minimized at the equator. Is that right?
Yes, greenhouse warming effect. And then there is a greenhouse warming effect, and CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So yes, increasing CO2 has a modest warming effect on the atmosphere, but it's virtually nil at the equator, and we have the most, according to greenhouse gas theory, at the high latitudes at either pole. We haven't seen it though in Antarctica, but again, we're talking about very modest warming here.
Milekovich in the 1900s, really early, when he did his work, he did his calculations for 71 degrees latitude in his own terms to make it more interesting. So yes, things do not change as much at the equator.
So question, what's the right word? Of the memes, I suppose, of the memes about climate change and global warming and the end of everything, is there anything broadly spoken among those themes that everyone agrees on that's actually true? Are there some actually true things in this conversation coming from the other side?
Okay, if I can jump in there, Walt. Number one, CO2 is rising. It started rising. You can see the chart here of atmospheric CO2. It really started rising significantly in the mid-20th century, in that post-World War II boom, economic boom, is really when CO2 started escalating. So if you're going to see any CO2-driven warming, we should see it from the 1950s, mid-1940s on. But we don't. So CO2 is rising. Is it warming? Yes. We're in a global warming trend. But the key here is that warming trend started more than 300 years ago, long before that increase in CO2 took place. So the first 250 years of the warming that we've seen, it actually goes back to the year 1695, late 17th century. First 250 years, that had to have been entirely naturally driven, and not by increases in CO2. And in fact, just as we started adding CO2 again in the mid 1940s, for 33 years, we went into a 33-year cooling trend just as we started adding CO2 to the atmosphere. So we all agree that CO2 is increasing, that we're in a long-term rise in temperature. It's not unprecedented and it's not unusual. So those two are two key themes. The big difference is that we see, or that I point to, is number one, is the warming driven by CO2 primarily? And number two, is more CO2 good or bad for the environment? And those are the two key issues that we're dealing with here.
So we were fortunate enough, I personally feel very fortunate. I had an opportunity in our first podcast to talk with Dr. Patrick Moore of Greenpeace fame, and a pretty remarkable individual and pretty terrific human being overall. But he has this wonderful, ironic, funny thing called the universal theory of scary stories. And it does move the needle emotionally for people when you say not only is climate warming bad, but it will kill you. There will be a hurricane that will kill you. There will be a sea rise that will tear your house down. You will burn to death. You will die of heat stroke. Okay. But I don't know that any of those things are true. I heard you recently, Greg, talk about whether or not there's a real danger of dying from the world getting warmer.
Yeah, well, but we've seen, again, we go back, I think you have to go back through human history uh, and look at the past warming periods that were a lot warmer than today. And what happened? Life flourished. Food was bountiful. We're going to see the same. We are seeing it right now. We don't see any evidence at all of negative effects of this warming. In fact, if we look at mortality, temperature-related mortality, 15 to 20 times as many people die due to heat, or excuse me, due to cold as to heat. So 15 to 20 times as many people die heat-related mortality as cold. They can't let that out. They have to stifle that information. And if you're just looking just at that fact alone, you could categorically state that global warming will save lives because you'll save millions of people an early death from cold-related deaths. But when you say global warming saves lives, oh, their heads explode. You can't say that. Well, yes, I can. I can back it up with science, facts, and data. We've got a billboard that's rotating around Salt Lake City, Utah right now. It's a picture of a young lady sleeping, resting comfortably in bed. And all it says is sleep well. There is no climate crisis. And that's the story that we at the CO2 Coalition, that Walt Johnson and this film makes, is there is no climate crisis. And life is good and getting better. We should celebrate that.
Well, Walt, what would you say to the polar bears up in the Arctic Circle about life getting better?
We got more of them. They've done better. And I look at the polar bears because I think the people that are promoting this know full well that it's going to get warmer in the Arctic than it is going to be at the equator. And that's why they chose the polar bears at the beginning, but then it's fallen apart. I mean, this one poor lady got fired because she said she's one of the world's foremost polar bear experts. And she said there's more there. And she got fired from a tenured position at
Susan Crawford.
It's my understanding that the Arctic nations where polar bears live got together and passed some international cooperative legislation to ban the killing, the indiscriminate hunting of polar bears, and that has exploded their population. I believe when, and I think I got this from you, Greg, I think when Al Gore published his book, there were 7,000 polar bears, and today there are 30,000. Well, I'm thrilled that I've had this opportunity to talk to you, and I'm so glad that so many people are going to get to hear this conversation. So let me just ask, as we contemplate the next phase, and you've said some very encouraging things, both of you, very encouraging things about a shift in the dynamics of the conversation. And that's what this whole film, A Climate Conversation, is trying to accomplish. It's trying to, first of all, it's trying to involve more people. And it's trying to kind of work from the middle out so we can go to the people who are going to pay for these solutions, if they indeed solve anything, and get them on board. Start to have a conversation about, well, what are the externalities here? What does this mean to your job? What does it mean to your kid's job? What does it mean to the economy where you live? What will it mean to the pristine forests that are going to have to be chopped down to put wind farms up? And I understand from the New York Times that basically the entire area of the upper Midwest would be 5 states, Illinois, Indiana, that those surrounding states, big ones, are required. That land mass is required just to hold the amount of land that would take to use to get the wind energy we need. And then you'd need all of New England for the solar energy or something like that. It's similar. It's a huge amount of area. So what do you see happening? How does this turn? What do the people watching this podcast need to know? What should they do?
If I could follow up on what you said, I was at a energy security meeting a few weeks ago, and there were a lot of agriculture people there, and they're having a lot of trouble. Let's say if you're saying, Illinois, you start putting wind farms in there, get a combine around that. You have a turning radius on these new combines that can't handle going around a wind farm. So we have lots of things we need to talk about. And that's becoming a big issue because there's some discussion of using eminent domain to take over farmland to put up solar farms and wind farms. And it's not going to be easy. We need to truly have some serious discussions here. And also, if you have a big solar farm and a tornado or a big hailstorm comes through, what happens? Apparently those glasses, a lot of the material in those solar panels can come out and get on the ground and can contaminate your land. So there are a lot of serious discussions we have to have here.
You were asking, I think, what's it going to take to turn this around? And I think we're seeing it right now. And it's a combination of pain. Just for example, my electric bills at my home in Florida, when we moved there 3 years ago, was $149 a month. We were on a plan. Over the last 4 months, we've averaged over $500. The average has been, we've tripled our electricity costs. Now we've got a few more people living in the home, but home in Florida is mainly the costs are air conditioning. But it's also, it's a little bit more used, but mainly for us, the electricity costs have just skyrocketed. So when people have pain in their wallet and their bank accounts, people get pretty nervous about that. You can see they're turning on people with inflation in their pocketbooks, with food prices going crazy, self-inflicted gasoline price increases because of this war on oil, and the war on coal is creating higher electricity prices. So I think the pain will drive people away from net zero, from carbon capture. And the key thing here, I think, I'm a scientist, so I think science wins the day. Scientific, we have to be able to get this message out to regular Joe and Jane on the street. And once we can do that and show just five charts, important charts that people have never seen.
Throw up my slide number 1 that I had. That was some of Greg's good work. Slide number 1. That is that's the Christmas one.
We need to rotate the slides here. I think that's on me. So if you'll stay with me, I can do that.
Yeah, bear in mind the blue line here is carbon dioxide.
There you go.
The red is
that's number 2. That's the percent of 100-degree days in Colorado. No, not that. There we go.
There you go.
And that is it fits in with a lot of things. Colorado is only one state away from Wyoming, which we talked about earlier. And we're back to the 100-degree days. Sorry, guys.
Well, you get the drift here.
Okay, we can see it from here that really Colorado is not having a dramatic change in temperature, and we don't have an imminent threat of anything severe happening. And yet the state of Colorado, and particularly my family, has probably been the most involved in state and local politics of any family around. And I can assure you that all of the new multi-story apartments in Lakewood are they make a big deal of having no fossil fuel, meaning no natural gas to heat them. And a lot of these multi-story apartments are subsidized for low-income people. So we're putting low-income people in these high-rise apartments that have to heat with electricity in the wintertime. And I can get a lot of good stories out of that, because electricity to heat with is going to be twice of what natural gas is. And we're doing the wrong things. We're hurting the poor people.
Well, a cynical person would say that there's a method behind that. I think we can dispense with the slides.
Yeah, go ahead.
And let me just say that if you have seen the film, if you're here for the podcast because you've seen this important documentary, thank you. Refer a friend. It's easy to find the film at climateconversation.com. It's easy to get a DVD. It's a great idea for you to make that DVD a present for a loved one, or to play the film at your home. The next time you have someone over, it's an hour well spent. And you're here with the stars today. And can't recommend enough. If you want to feel good about this world, if you want to look at geology as a study not just of earth science, but a study of the people who live and interface with this world, then I think you should get Greg's books, Inconvenient Facts, and the follow-up, which is out now, very convenient, warming, and learn some stuff. You're going to feel enlightened, and I think you're going to be more optimistic than you've ever been, that a slightly warmer world that's more plant-friendly and greening is exactly what we need. And the idea of spending trillions of dollars in pursuit of no benefit, or no measurable benefit, no powerful impact, when that money can be spent in other ways, or just simply kept in the pockets of the world's citizens, there is a brighter future. And it starts with reversing a trend of having science follow policy and starting to have policy follow science. So having scientists together and having an opportunity to meet has been a great joy for me. I want to thank you both for participating. Long-form conversations are the way forward. And let's look forward to that second film.
Thank you.
Yeah, here. Thank you so
we
much.
know we've got a powerful leading man. So that'd be great. Great to see you again, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Walt, as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. See you next time. Please visit climateconversation.com, where you can find more information about the film. You can purchase a DVD Blu-ray, and you can contribute to future projects. We hope you'll consider doing that, and we hope we'll see you at our next podcast.